Greetings and welcome back to another iteration of MGTOW Talks. I'm here today with a rather unique guest, a man whose channel I only recently discovered. This channel's name is Reflections. He is a lord of Sverige, of Sweden, and the video that put me onto him and made me want to do this talk is entitled MGTOW, Buddhist Philosophy, Happiness, Love, Women, and Addictions. And we're going to talk about some of what he talks about in that video, and I would recommend you subscribe to the channel. And yeah, I would talk about some other related topics as well. He's very much involved in philosophy, has formally studied it, as opposed to, say, me, who was only informed. Well, I did partially formally study philosophy, but also never officially. And yeah, so we're going to launch into it. So welcome to the MGTOW Talks. Reflections. Thank you for being here. Tak.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, and we already discussed how we're going to proceed. So the first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is Buddhism, and Buddhism not so much as a religion, although certainly it can have religious aspects, and some people perceive it to be. But as someone who's familiar with Buddhism, as someone who, you're a practiced meditator, you meditate, how would you describe Buddhism in general?
Yeah, I would describe it like if you take away all the, myths and legends, and it's just, science of the mind, and they use logic and experience to make their point. So it's like the Buddha famously said, "Don't believe anything just because I said it, etc., etc. Only believe it if it accords with your reasoning and experience." So it's like basically an investigative practice where you look inside your own mind and you see the causes and effects, and yeah, you can see, the Four Noble Truths, or which is basically, you could call them mental laws if you want. So it's science of the mind, or just if you want it, life advice or something.
Life advice. I like that. Now, some of you may be familiar with a video that I made about basic Buddhist teaching, specifically dukkha, where I talked about the the Four Noble Truths. But for the purpose of review, for people who haven't watched that video, or for people who are maybe interested, why don't we talk a little bit about this is sort of the key concept in Buddhism. The idea of the Four Noble Truths, the idea of suffering as being sort of inherent to being a living being.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, for the purpose of review, those who are not familiar, those who are familiar, this will just be a review. But the idea behind the Four Noble Truths, created by supposedly the Buddha, who cares if he was an actual person or not, but it does, as Reflections pointed out, it's not so much that the Buddha said these things that make them true. It's the fact that they're experiential. You can experience them. You can sort of absorb this, and you can attest to it yourself. Whether he actually existed or not doesn't even matter. The fact that you can prove this stuff to yourself is what matters. So, the first noble truth is that every experience we have is conditional. It's conditional on the idea of stimulus, and that stimulus ends, and then you seek a new stimulus, and so you're stuck in this loop of essentially being dissatisfied because you're always craving the next new thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's like you're a dog, chasing around for the next nice smell. You just get pulled around by your desires, and this causes suffering. Even though like if you find that thing that you want, it will be, pleasant for a while, but then it goes away, and then you start wanting something else. So it's like people refer to it as the hedonic treadmill. You get used to a certain like standard of living, or
Yeah.
what you want to call it, and then that becomes the new baseline. So you adjust, according to it. It's only fun for a while.
Yeah, I had this aspect of this conversation with my biochemist friend about the hedonic treadmill, which is essentially what the Four Noble Truths are sort of discussing. I mean,
Yeah, and you can also explain it in terms of, brain chemistry and neurotransmitters if you want. Like,
yeah, I mean that's certainly important, but I think you don't need that for a basic understanding. I think all you need is observation and some experience to understand that.
yeah, I mean, everyone who has lived for a while, they know how it works. You get tired of,
Yeah, it
that
results the
video
second.
game, that video game, or that, when you were a little kid, that toy you got on Christmas, it was really exciting when you got it. But
Yeah,
then after a while, it got kind of boring. You started to forget about it, and then you want another toy, you know?
right, and that's the second truth. Basically, that this craving and clinging eventually leads to dissatisfaction,
Mm.
and the idea after the third truth is trying to figure out a way to what they call cessation, the
Mm.
ending that,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's pretty much. And then the fourth one is the entire process of
Yeah,
discipline and mindfulness and what have you.
the
But
Eightfold Noble Path,
yeah,
I
yeah, and
think.
that's
Yeah,
that's in a nutshell. But it's
yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's interesting that speaking of new pleasures, I think men in particular, since this is MGTOW talks, this
Mm.
has been talked about. The idea of sexual novelty. Sexual novelty is something that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
tends to be much more appealing to men than women, just because of the way we evolved.
Yeah, all of this, the Coolidge effect, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And as true as it is, as far as male humans are concerned, uh,
Mm.
this is just actually just one other aspect of so many that can fall into the category of dukkha, or this path of suffering and craving.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. It's
constantly
like,
wanting something new.
yeah, yeah. I mean, sure, you can. I mean, it's probably easier to, cut down on food than to cut down on women. It's like, or like wanting them, or like, yeah.
Well, I think it's
So,
it's as you pointed out, the hedonic treadmill. It's
mm,
it's intoxicating. You reach one level, and you
mm,
want to go this. I'm not immune to this. I mean, even as we're speaking now, I'm a gamer, and
mm,
I know gaming. Obviously, I admit it. I'm not perfect. It's all about stimulus,
yeah,
and you're always looking to essentially outscore the last stimulus you had, and this manifests itself as this game is better than the last one. And I've been slowly
yeah,
saving up my money for like a supercomputer now, slowly, hopefully in a couple
yeah.
of months. Why? So I
Well,
can get
yeah.
an even better stimulus. you know
Yeah,
and I do this knowing I'm familiar, at least intellectually, with this science of the mind. I know that
mm,
it ultimately produces some sense of dissatisfaction, or at the very least boredom,
yeah, yeah,
because at some point in time the supercomputer isn't a supercomputer anymore. It's just what you've grown
yeah,
accustomed to, right?
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah,
this is true of everything. That can be the same, as pussy. Your brand new hot girlfriend after a half a year or so. I mean, it's just the same thing as anything else.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it's so basically in Buddhism, this is the core focus. Although there are different schools, there are two primary schools of Buddhism, but these are
Yeah,
the original teachings. Do you
yeah,
want to go a
exactly.
little bit into briefly maybe the differences between the two schools, Theravada and Mahayana?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So, it's my impression that the Theravadan teachers, they are a lot more, hardcore, and they interpret the Buddha's teaching a lot more literally, and they have maybe a slightly different interpretation of the teachings. And while Mahayana practitioners, they have a bit more focus on, compassion and, love for all sentient beings. And they have also different meditation practices, I think. It's like the Dalai Lama, he practices shamatha meditation, which is sort of a breath meditation, and he does this in order to increase his concentration. So he then can use that to, get insight into the nature of reality and his mind. While in Theravada, they have something called insight meditation, and there they do both things at the same time in the meditation. So it's not just they're focusing on the breath; they are also, focusing on the breath, and they are also, when mental objects like a feeling or something comes, they note it, as a feeling. So they use. So then they get some insight. Like if you're trapped inside the feeling, you're all wrapped up in it. If you just say, like you pin it down and you say feeling, it sort of becomes external to you, and then it doesn't influence you as much, and then it goes away. So yeah, and it's a bit like a different type of goal also. Like for Theravada Buddhists, the goal is enlightenment, but for Mahayana Buddhists, it can be enlightenment, but there's also this idea of becoming a bodhisattva, and that is someone who gets very close to enlightenment, but he chooses not to, ascend. So he instead chooses to be reborn in order to, help other people to ascend, and then he himself will ascend. So. And I think maybe there's some other differences, like in mythology and probably like interpretation of the Buddha's teaching. But I'm pretty sure, they all agree on the Four Noble Truths. But there's so many commentaries, like layers on commentaries on the teachings. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's also, let's face it, there's a mythology that is not based on evidence in many Buddhist teachings that I personally reject for the same reasons that I reject any other sort of divine revelation.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
There's a distinction, I think, as well, and it's a distinction I struggle with between, intellectually understanding things such as the Four Noble Truths and intellectually grasping reality. And then there's, for lack of a better word, I'll call it spiritual. There's just no other word to really describe it. What you do, you're a practice meditator.
You mean like experiential understanding, maybe?
Well, as far as meditation is concerned, I struggle with it because anyone who's tried to meditate, the idea with meditation is, concentrating on some object. Yes, you have the breath meditation. It doesn't have to be. In theory, you could concentrate on a fork or a knife, but
yeah,
it's when you start to try to meditate, at least, you're going to notice very quickly that your entire day, as long as you're awake, not sleeping, and you are assaulted by thoughts just nonstop, and how difficult it is for this process to stop. When you try to meditate, these thoughts are just boom, it's coming up, and it's pulling you away from the meditative practice, and it just shows how difficult it is, at least for some people.
Yeah, I think it's like that for everyone when they begin. There's a great point to be made that you shouldn't try to force your mind to stop, because that will just make it even more tense, and you will start thinking more, and you will start saying, "Oh, I'm such a bad meditator. Oh, this is not going well." It's like instead you should just yeah, okay, I'll try this out. Okay, here's the thought. Okay, let me look at it. Okay, I noted thought. There it goes. Okay, here comes a new one. Okay, now I should focus on the breath. So it's it's important what attitude you have also. There's no wrong meditation, because it's like that for everyone.
Kind of like the path of least resistance. I've talked about this before, that in general, and I think this is true in some of the things that Buddhism talks about, There's a certain power to acceptance rather than being combative and resisting.
Mm.
That creates more tension
Yeah,
and frustration.
it's like there's a saying, suffering. It's like wanting from reality what it can never give you.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
like if you have a person talking about, things should be this way. I should be here right now. Then they are suffering because they are trying to, they are not accepting reality for what it is. It's basically they are resisting reality, and that it never works. But it's a human thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and we talked about this. I mean, reality is neutral, and so in some sense,
Mm.
suffering is attributing a quality to reality that
Mm.
isn't neutral. Wanting it to be
Yeah.
something that it's not, wanting
Mm.
for you to be something that you're not, given
Yeah.
your place in reality, is
Mm.
almost certainly going to lead to a sense of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's we were talking about this just before that it it's kind of a paradox, right? We evolved in an environment where this layer of thought, this depth of thought, was just not possible. I mean, I'm assuming millions of years
Mm.
ago, our hominid ancestors simply could not conceive of these things, and as all organisms
Mm.
go, they existed to survive and reproduce and make copies of their genes. And so there's
Mm.
a very core aspect to just human physiology, even, that runs counter to this science of the mind, if we want to call it this, that's in constant tension and opposition, right? It's
Yeah.
you in that video, I thought it was interesting the observation you made that even though you're a practiced meditator, that you still sometimes fall into the trap of getting angry or getting frustrated or any of these things, right?
Yeah. Maybe like a bit less than regular people, but it or what you say, people who don't practice, let's say. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
So you have, because it's like in your biology, you were talking about the path of least resistance. What is that? Yeah, you just basically you sit down and you do nothing. And if you do that, yeah, maybe you will become enlightened. So
But as we were just talking about, you might become enlightened, but the cost of that is that we might not have something that we've come to call human civilization. And so it's a
yeah.
question, it's something I've struggled with for years, ever since I started studying, at least from an intellectual perspective, Buddhist teachings,
Mm.
and knowing of intellectuals, a guy like Sam Harris, who is very well familiar with Buddhist teachings, where you have this civilizational project, right? This,
Mm.
which is based essentially upon it's an external projection of all these sort of physiological drives, and
Mm.
it's a reflection of what we are as biological beings, specifically as human beings. But to become
Mm.
enlightened seems almost to run counter to that. I mean, if everyone
Yeah,
were
exactly.
enlightened, how much work would get done? What would happen?
Yeah.
Drive, ambition, hatred, jealousy,
Yeah. I
poetry.
mean,
People write. I mean, some of the quote unquote greatest literature of the world has been
mm.
inspired by these really extreme feelings that, in the context of a science of the mind, are
Mm.
negative and are not something that you actually should be desiring or should be or are just not
Yeah.
beneficial to you.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhist monks, they're prohibited from, watching television, dancing and singing. They have all these rules put upon them because of this. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
yeah, uh, you know, it runs very counter to human nature and, biology, because we want to, survive and reproduce. And if we are just, we, and we do this, because it's pleasant to, eat, sleep, and fuck, fuck. So if you are, you become enlightened. Uh, it's like you you wouldn't have the desire to do these things because you are already feeling, such peace, such happiness that you get that anyway, right? So it's basically like if someone were to strap you to a chair, or they had an example with a rat, like they have a button, right? So if the rat presses the button, he gets some small shot of like heroin or something, and that mouse he so the experiment started out with them, bringing in a female rat. So then that male would mate, and then they brought in that button. So when they brought in the button, the rat kept pressing the button until it died of starvation. So it's like maybe a bit poor of an analogy because that drug is like it's very addictive, and the Buddhist idea of happiness is more about equanimity and not resisting reality, but just embracing and accepting it for what it is.
Yeah, that's a really important word, by the way, equanimity. I don't think we hear it nearly as often enough in MGTOW circles, but in society in general. I mean, it's we hear words such as justice and unfairness and hypocrisy. How many people actually talk about equanimity? It's so rare.
Yeah, it's probably because it's like not an emotionally loaded word. So it's like just
opposite. But you know what I've been wondering, though, with respects to equanimity and this essentially it's a conflict of interest between, they say, a science of the mind and basically the building blocks of civilization, if you will, is that I might be tempted to invoke the Aristotelian golden mean, for example, in a sense that, yes, if you go down the Western route of the hedonic treadmill, I live for stimulus credo.
Yeah.
You're almost certainly going to condemn yourself to a great deal of unhappiness and dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you go down the path of enlightenment of a bodhisattva, nothing is going to get done. I mean, if I were truly pursuing the path of enlightenment, I wouldn't be making videos, I wouldn't be talking to you, I would just be, meditating and doing nothing, presumably. And so an Aristotelian golden mean seems to make some kind of sense, in the sense that you're not going to get a perfect version of either. I mean, I have to admit, I reject the Western hedonic treadmill, but I also have to, if I want to do what I'm doing now, and it is something I want to do, which is, of course, a stimulus, I guess, I still have to reject the most extreme forms and manifestations of the path to enlightenment, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something called, in Buddhism, the middle way.
Yeah.
And so you don't go to either extreme, but you go take, the middle way, like in between. So, yeah, I mean, I think a key word here also is, moderation, like enjoying things in moderation. And it's like you yourself, you can basically adjust your levels of happiness if you want. You can, let's say, you have you stop playing video games for a while. For example, if we take you, and then you start, with these really old games like Tetris.
Yeah.
And then you build say yourself up to Mario, and you go like progressively, like for each decade. So then if you have completely stopped, you will be like, oh, Tetris is so exciting. And then it will be boring. And then you will go to Mario, oh, this is so new and cool. And then, so you can, condition yourself to, if you want to go through, the samsaric cycle, if you will, but you can still make sure that you get continuous stimulation by just like lowering your hedonic threshold for a while.
Yeah, in theory that could work, and I've actually noticed this. There was a game that came out not too long ago called Pillars of Eternity, which I was really excited about, and I noticed because it's a game that is in a modern context, say of 2015. There are no real voice dialogues. It's all just reading and what have you. that I had been so out of, I guess, out of practice in one sense, and so used to this, say, a voice protagonist acting out the scenes, that I almost didn't. I can't say I didn't enjoy it, but it's sort of. I thought, wow, I used to enjoy this so much. What happened? And it's obviously a case of some new stimulus had replaced it, and it's just not. It's just sort of a dead stimulus to me now. It just doesn't work as effectively as it used to.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, we can see these addiction-forming patterns in a lot of aspects of our lives. Like, take food for example. Like, maybe like if you eat a very simple meal, maybe just some grains and beans and just some salt or something, and you eat that. I mean, if it's, let's say you have only eaten, rice before, something like plain rice, and then you eat this meal, it will seem like, oh, this is really rich and luxurious, beans and salt, wow. But then after that, you would want to, maybe add some, I don't know, tomato sauce, some chili, some garlic, ginger, some meat, So you always want to keep, getting more and more. So the problem is, as your senses come into contact with the object, that is when, you make your first mistake. You start liking, the experience. If you had equanimity there, you would just like, yeah, it's rice. You just eat it, like it will fill me up, it will give me energy. So I will eat it. But if you don't have it, you will start liking it, and then when you start liking it, like you feel, the experience of pleasure. And the first time when you encounter, a new stimulus, that experience will be very strong. So you will like, oh, I like this. I want to get it again. So maybe you try to eat the same thing again, but then it's not as tasty because now you're used to it. So then you want to keep adding things,
Yeah, this is absolutely my experience with food. I mean, to varying degrees, have throughout my life had some kind of food addiction. I mean, I can control it because I still, I engage in fasting practices sometimes as well. But I'm best when I just look at fuel from a purely mechanical point of view. Okay, there are calories, this is the energy, this is going to do this. But I can, unfortunately, I can turn that switch off and just say, oh, this is just good, this tastes good, this sauce tastes good. And that's, I find, when I start going down the hedonic treadmill, in my case, my greatest vice is almost certainly food. That's where I start making mistakes, is when I start looking at food as a source of pleasure rather than just sustenance and nutrition. And this can be, true of anything. This just happens to be the case with food. And I think in some sense, a scientific, talk about a science of the mind, a scientific approach to just about anything can help produce equanimity. I mean, if you're just looking at food in terms of the contents, nutrition, macronutrients, vitamins, it's hard to just, in that context, it's hard to look at it as a source of pleasure. You're just saying, okay, I'm doing this for my body. I guess this is good, whatever.
Yeah. This is also why, Buddhist monks, they only have one meal a day. So they don't think about food so much, and they don't get to choose what they eat either. Because they go for alms rounds, so they take whatever they can.
Yeah.
Whatever they are given, they have to eat, unless like there's some special rule, like if an animal was slaughtered specifically for a monk, then they can't take the meat. But otherwise, it's And this monk Ajahn Brahm, he's very funny. He talked about that all the senior monks, they got to take the good food first, and he was, Westerner. He went to Thailand to study in the Theravada forest tradition, and there, this kind of poor farmers, they had something called rotten fish curry. So he had to eat that basically, and there were like worms in it and stuff. But he just he just ate it. So I guess after a while you will get used to it.
Well, of course, the social context is really helpful. I mean, if you're willfully putting yourself into some sort of training, a setting to train, say as a Theravada Buddhist monk, that's quite different than living in a place like Sweden or Germany or the United States or or Great
Yeah.
Britain, because
Because we are assaulted by,
stimulus.
promises of new stimulus every day, like
Yeah.
sales, commercials, like, oh, try this new product, it will make you feel so good, or oh, come and eat here because food is so tasty, it will be like, nothing you have ever had before, or, you know,
Yeah,
it's
and I
all about,
think there's
keeping it going.
another side effect to that is especially in the modern era, say in 2015 and last couple of years with the internet,
Mm.
is a difficulty in concentrating. I was trying the other day to watch a documentary about the rainforest, and then I saw something else come up. I don't know if you play games, computer games, but
Yeah, yeah, I
okay,
do.
you've heard of the series Mass Effect. So I saw
Yeah.
this Mass Effect, and I heard that Mark Meer, who was the guy who voiced Commander Shepard, was doing it. It was only 6 or 7 minutes long about sort of the lore. And so in the middle
Yeah.
of the documentary about the rainforest, I stop. I need to finish this, but shit, I got to watch. So I changed to him, watch 3 minutes of the Mark Meer thing, go back to the rainforest for five. And at the end, so instead of just finishing one thing the other, which might have taken 40 minutes, I ended up changing
Yeah.
between the two for over 2 hours. Couldn't
Mm.
decide. And so it's really just it's basically it's sensory overstimulation, what we're experiencing
Yeah.
now, and the inability to concentrate. I think if you look at, for example, this is of course just human nature to some extent. Look at what's
Mm.
successful on YouTube, generally speaking. Sound bites,
Mm.
right? Short videos that grab
Yeah,
your attention
exactly.
and end after about 5 minutes. Now, I'm not going to deny that all of us are hardwired to be attentive for a limited amount of time.
Mm.
But I definitely think the environment we live in has reconditioned us to be even less attentive than we could potentially be. For example, my subscribers are going to watch this video. I suspect that only some of them, the most quote unquote devout, I don't mean devout to me, but interested in knowledge, they're the ones who are going to watch the entire thing. And other people are going to maybe watch 5, 10, 15 minutes and then just tune it out or watch it later or whatever. So
Mm.
it's, I think it's actually an obstacle to pursuing knowledge and understanding because you can't understand things if your attention is constantly divided amongst so many different things.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you have to sit down and focus on whatever it is you're doing, and
Yeah.
when you're done with that, yeah, maybe you can go on to the next thing, but it's so difficult to do in the current atmosphere, and I think it's going to get worse as time goes by.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, here in Sweden, there was like a great fiasco about the Swedish school system. Like Swedish, uh, kids, they are really bad at maths.
Hmm.
I think this could be, a contributing factor because math is it's very logical. It's not like you get the easy, quick reward. Like when you watch PewDiePie, you see him playing some game and he
PewDiePie.
gets scared and and he does some funny reaction and then you laugh. But it's like with maths, you have to sit down, you have to concentrate. You like, oh, this X and Y and where do they go? And
Well, and
okay,
it's
I've got to
hard.
solve this
It's
equation.
hard for
Yeah.
most people. It's
Uh,
hard. I mean, it's not.
and
Uh,
if your mind has been used to getting, lots of emotional stimulation, of course, you know, maths, it won't be exciting, or
what's
fun. I mean, for me, it's like if I sit and work a lot, for on a problem, when I solve it, I get a little bit of a kick. Yeah, I get it. That, you know, the light turns on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's
so.
not just maths. I think
Mm.
I've seen stats on just reading in general, and it's just been kind of dropping overall. I notice even myself. I still like
Mm.
paper books, books with pages and stuff. I'll read a
Yeah, me
book. I'm in
too.
the process of reading a book by Steven Pinker right now on morality and whatever. And
Mm.
my reading pace has slowed down tremendously. Whereas, 10, 15 years ago, when I wasn't spending all my time on the internet, I was reading two, maybe even three times faster. At least that's my impression. And
Yeah.
it's what are you going to do? You can't really
Yeah.
turn off the internet, especially since all
Yeah.
all the jobs I do involve the internet, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
stuck with it.
Yeah. I have this theory, about stimulus. Like the more senses that are involved, uh, in the stimulus, the more enjoyable it will be. It will feel the more real.
Hmm.
So, for example, if you're watching a YouTube video, you get the sound, you get the visual, and you also get, the thought. You reflect maybe upon the material. Maybe not when you're watching PewDiePie, you just like laugh, but if you're watching like one of your videos, uh, but for example, when you're reading a book, it's only like uh, basically thought, inner commentary. You're just following it, so it's not, as real and as intense as something else you could do. You
Well,
know.
that's I think what happened with books in general, and just reading in general. It was replaced by a greater stimulus. Effectively, I think you're right on the money. I think you're very accurate in saying that. Uh, you know, 150 years ago, you read a book in the fireplace and with the candlelight or whatever, and
Mhm.
you had to imagine what was going on. None of the kinds of stimuli that exist now
Mhm.
were present, and it.
Yeah, it's like when you're reading, you're exercising also your, ability to imagine,
Yeah,
like forming mental images.
yeah,
But if you're just watching, video, you get things for free, so you don't have to work as much. And yeah, so
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's also I've heard of this effect, that you can search everything up, things, the knowledge. So there's no need to basically to remember, things. You can just remember, keywords and type them into Google.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I guess I'm fortunate to be part of sort of a dying generation that still had to learn things in a more traditional manner, which is not to say I don't Google things. I do it all the time. But in some sense, the Coolidge effect doesn't just apply to, I think it's a universal. I mean, what the Coolidge effect is
Mm,
talking about, it's just talking about human nature and the need for
yeah,
new stimulus. Of course, it specifically applies to human males and their need for
yeah.
novelty and
It's
new
like
sex experiences.
you know,
But
pattern of forming an addiction or dependency or on something. It's universal, Same for many things.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
and I don't know. It's just hard for at least for me to walk the path, if you will, in between. I
mm,
intellectually, I don't find myself aligning very well with the conventional Western attitude of the hedonic treadmill. I know
mm,
from firsthand experience it can be damaging. It can be
mm.
well. It almost certainly will lead to damage if done, excessively.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's really hard to live in moderation in today's society because you're always getting, bombarded with messages that you can have more, you can have better, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
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 I
and
mean, I think a good thing if you want to do it that way, you can like maybe start going for, a bit minimalistic lifestyle, and uh, you just try to cut out as much advertising of your life as possible, and you just look at, what do I need? I don't need, you know the newest pair of jeans. I can buy these cheaper ones. I don't need the newest cell phone. I can get the cheaper one.
well, as it
So
pertains to MGTOW, I think there's certainly. I mean, there was some discussion and debate for a while. It wasn't really a debate; it was more just accusations about sort of minimalism and MGTOW.
yeah,
Now,
this wallowing in filth and misery.
misery, yes,
Yeah.
and my lord of following filth. I mean, I guess the question you need to ask yourself and going your own way is now: to what extent do you want to wallow in filth and misery? Basically,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
what I didn't. I mean, I guess this was misunderstood and misinterpreted. I don't have any objections per se to MGTOW becoming filthy rich and pursuing all these things. I think my
Mm,
whatever objections might be present lie not in in the pursuits themselves, but in the fact that that kind of activity is exactly the kind of overstimulus that's going to make you ultimately dissatisfied. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at celebrities, you know, they
yeah.
have all the money that they have more money they could ever hope to spend.
Hmm.
And what happens to most of them? Yeah, they start taking drugs because you know they're getting all the other things, so they want more, and then they start taking more drugs, and then maybe they die of an overdose or they get damaged for life or something.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a bit strange, but I mean you should be thankful you're not rich, right?
Oh, I
Because that can
am in
be a
some
great
sense.
pain.
There, although maybe I'm arrogant in thinking this, I always imagine to myself in those rare moments where I actually envision, fantasies or the
Mm,
impossible. If I were a rich person, would
mm,
I be living terribly different than I am now? And I like to think I wouldn't be. I think it would be almost identical. I might go out a
mm,
little more often to eat some meals, maybe,
mm.
and
Yeah,
but I just would have, I guess, fewer sort of material worries, and I wouldn't worry about the future as much and where I'm going to live and rent
yeah.
but I don't think things would dramatically
Like
change.
I have this fantasy, like when I become rich, I will just, um, I will not display my wealth. I will just move, to a new town
Hmm.
and just live like in a 1 or 2 room apartment and just keep doing what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
think I would probably, just go to the university for the rest of my life,
Yeah,
probably.
I thought about doing that as well. I think if I were, a multimillionaire, I probably would. I'd go back to university and start studying evolutionary psychology just because I could. I'd have the money. It
Yeah.
wouldn't be a problem. I would be. I've mentioned this before. I have this kind of to do a project on my to do list. Technically I'm Hungarian, but I don't speak Hungarian. And before I
Mm,
die, I'd like to do that, but it's such a
mm,
time investment, and it wouldn't give me anything financially. So there are a
yeah.
lot of things I would do, but as far as my lifestyle, no, I would still walk around in my t-shirts and my jeans that are 10 years old, and I wouldn't. That stuff never interested me. Of course, I probably
Yeah.
the only stimulus area of my life where I think it would affect me is, as far as technology is concerned, computers. I mean, I
Yeah.
if I had that kind of money, I probably would put together the
Yeah.
supercomputer, probably. But
Yeah.
I'm like I
Yeah.
said, I'm somewhere in between the extremes of the one hedonistic treadmill and people actively pursuing enlightenment, because
Yeah. It's
I
like,
can't. There are benefits to pursuing stimuli. I mean, we have civilization. We wouldn't be having this conversation if
yeah.
some of the things that we're talking about weren't the case. If people just gave up on everything. So there has to be, I think, ultimately some kind of happy medium between the two. And I think actually
Yeah.
MGTOW is a good way of looking at it. I think in some sense, depending on what your interpretation is, there are a million interpretations from, the only thing about MGTOW is just not getting married to, reevaluating reality, which, would be
Mm.
more out my camp.
Yeah.
Reevaluating your life, what it is you need, what it is you think you want,
Mm.
and understanding the nature of reality and you as a human being,
Mm.
and that acceptance, that equanimity. I think
Mm.
equanimity could go a long way in the MGTOW community. That's my opinion, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hoping really that many MGTOWs will try at least exploring a bit of Buddhism and maybe meditating a bit and thinking about, moderation and minimalism and trying it, and maybe it will make their lives better. But um, uh, if you are like a MGTOW monk, like you don't associate with women at all, then you're basically cutting out one of the strongest, stimuli from your life. So uh, if you're a MGTOW in that sense, or even if you're like maybe not pursuing women actively, you're on a good way to equanimity. So
I think so, and I've often thought about this that you don't find equanimity too often in the MGTOW community. You find we talked about this as well. The
mm,
most popular MGTOW videos tend to be the ones that are not equanimous, but rather emotional, and they get the feelings going and feelings riled up. And
Yeah.
I have to ask myself sometimes, those videos tend not to do very much for me. I don't really feel a whole lot towards those
Mm.
videos.
Mm.
For example, I think I like Spetsnaz as a person. I think he does good stuff. I hear he tries to help people, and that's great.
Mm.
But his content is, frankly speaking, for me too emotional, such that I don't really get too much from his videos directly. But I understand the stimulus effect that it has. Now, I
Mm.
sometimes think, given the fact that I don't, I mean, I still talk to women, I play games with women, but I don't have any real sort of, I'm pursuing women or anything like that. I don't really
Mm.
deal with women on a daily basis, at least. That
Yeah.
puts me in some sort of position of distance, so it's easier to be equanimous regarding them. And maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe if I were still working in an office surrounded by women, it would be a lot more difficult. It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I mean, I look at my videos, and the one that has gotten the least amount of views is like it's called a universal definition of MGTOW,
Yeah.
and it's a very rigorous definition and argumentation.
Hmm.
And there's almost no pictures. It's just like a picture of the text of the definition, and
Right.
that has like the lowest amount of views. So it's the most, logical and rigorous video I think I made. So,
Yeah, and I
uh,
found time and again the videos
and
that
and it's like you put so much work into it as well, those videos, because you try to be really precise,
hmm,
get it really, and then you get so few views. It's like,
it's a bit frustrating, and I completely
mm,
commiserate because the really long scripted videos I've done that take a long time to research and then write out and then produce,
it's
they're
like,
not. I mean, they're not all that popular compared to some other things that tend to be more emotive and
yeah,
shorter things. And I struggle. I mean, I don't know if my viewers know this, but I would like to make fewer videos, but of higher quality, scripted, better research videos. But the
mm,
reality for me is there is a practical concern is that part of my living comes from the channel now, and
mm,
I'm actually not getting anything more for making complex, well argued scripted videos than I am for 10-minute videos
yeah.
about some
Basically, you
piece of
you can
news.
just sit down and have a rant and bash on women, make
Well, I
jokes,
don't do
make a bit of
that, but
comedy.
I don't do
It,
that,
but
but
yeah, but I'm just saying, like, if you wanted, more views,
oh yeah,
you,
yeah,
you you could just sit down and rant and make some jokes and like claim men are superior than women, women should not be able to vote, etc., etc. And then that will get the viewers really emotionally loaded, and they will like, oh, I like this, I will share it, oh, you know.
yeah. I mean, that's how all of YouTube works. This isn't unique to MGTOW. And
Yeah, it's like,
anything that gives you an emotional kick tends to just set people off. And and I've been there's this video that I've been thinking about starting and working on for a long time, and it would be a tremendous undertaking, like escape velocity type of thing. And I'm just,
mm,
putting all the time and effort into it. It's just sometimes I think, will it be worth it? I feel almost very driven
mm,
to do it because I think it's such an important topic, which I'm not going to spoil.
yeah.
But it's just
I
it's
mean,
difficult.
for me, it's a reward, because when you have just thoughts running around in your head,
Yeah.
when you write them down and organize them, and then you have to think like, oh, I have to explain this in a understandable way to
Hmm.
someone else. Just doing that, it will make everything much more clear and organized in your head.
Yeah.
So, I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
that's
There's
a
that.
reward in itself, but it's like a bit frustrating because you feel like, you know, I have put so much work into this. I have really, extracted the nuggets of wisdom. I put it down into, good language. I made good explanations and everything.
Hmm.
And then you you get so like not so many views compared to like PewDiePie, who just sits there and he just screams into the mic and all of these things. So
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a thing. But there is a kind of a personal pressure I feel when I have a bunch of good ideas going on in my head. I almost feel compelled to put them together. And when there's so much material, I just think I have to script this out. I can speak
mm,
reasonably well without scripting things, but when it's so much material, I just think I have to script this, and it could potentially be really long, and it could take a great deal of time.
Mm.
And yeah, but so I think there is that contention
Mm.
within, or rather friction within all of YouTube, but specifically the MGTOW community, between the emotional and the sort of the equanimous, if you will.
Mm.
And I personally, like I said, just a preference of mine. I prefer the equanimous approach,
Mm.
the sort of more measured, because the problem I have with just pure emotion is that it's all it is pure stimulus. Usually, it makes you
Mm.
feel good. That's true. But then eating a cookie or cake makes you feel it's in the same. It's identical essentially.
Yeah.
You're not really you're not learning anything new. You're not contributing additional information to what you're seeking. If you're a knowledge seeker, it still can
Yeah,
have certainly
exactly.
a purpose. I mean, if you're down, I can totally see if you're down in the dumps and you just feel like shit, and someone has an uplifting message that isn't particularly insightful, but is just feeding your emotions. That's a good
Mm.
thing. I mean, you're getting pulled out of the gutter, as it were, and,
Yeah.
and so that's a good thing. But maybe a balance is best. I don't know. But for myself, I don't react
Mm.
very much to emotional videos. When I watch them, and I feel almost nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm always on the lookout for the more measured, calm approach. And it's rare.
Yeah.
I think it's rare.
Yeah, and like if you compare between the sexes, women are a lot more emotional, and uh, the emotions, it's like they come first, and then they rationalize their emotions. And
Yeah.
guys, they do it the other way around, you know. They
Well,
just,
that I think all human beings are certainly every human being engages in sort of post hoc rationalization. Women tend to do it more
mm,
than men, and women also. I mean, as I said, all human beings do, but generally speaking, women do tend to extrapolate their own personal experiences as a sort of
yeah,
measuring stick for all of reality and the
yeah,
world itself.
exactly. It's like I read, a PUA article. It's called "The Truth About Women," and
Hmm.
the guy said, he's been doing this for a while, and he said, there is nothing more important to a woman than one, the way she feels, and two, making new discoveries about why she feels the way she feels. So that's why chicks love, you know, astrology, 50 Shades of Grey, Twilight,
Yeah.
because,
Well, I
yeah, it
think
stimulates them, you
it's
know.
it's rather fascinating because I have if on occasion if somebody sends me a PM or a question, or some men will ask me, what if I still want to date, and do I have any advice? And I'm not I'm not an advisor, but there is a kind of measuring stick, if you will. If you're going to date a woman or be involved with a woman, there's certain
Mm,
questions you can ask. I mean, for example, I've been in a bunch of relationships, and one thing that always occurred to me is when you ask them, what is it that you like about me? And one of the most popular answers, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, is I love the way you make me feel. Now, this tells
mm,
you almost nothing about your own individual qualities. It
mm,
tells you nothing about your characteristics as a person, your
mm.
likes, your dislikes. It's just
Yeah,
it's a purely egocentric exercise in saying, oh, the way you make me feel. And I think that's a
it's
good.
like it's like, what do you like about this, piece of chocolate cake? It's like, yeah, I like the way it makes me feel. It's tasty. I like the texture. It's you know.
Well, no, that's adding too much information, because usually the women in these contexts never they don't describe the texture of you. They don't say, well, there's this quality of blah 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 when when you
Mm.
describe this, or. And so this is something that you
Yeah.
can actually use as a test if you are going to be involved with women. Because if
Mm.
you, on the rare, maybe there is some woman to say, well, I really like your thoughts on some subject, as opposed to saying, which almost never happens, as opposed to
Yeah,
saying,
that's more like what a guy would say. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if
yeah,
you, if like,
yeah.
it's
Well,
like,
it's absolutely
yeah.
fascinating that the men, in my experience throughout my life, have had far more interest say my personality or what drives me as an individual than women. I think
Mm.
I can't really think of a single example. I can't even think of my mother. My mother doesn't understand me at all.
Mm. Yeah.
Who actually took the time to understand what my drives and motivations might be. It's
Mm.
just it is what it is. It's just the
And
way
it's
women
like
are, right?
it's like what you want to talk about, at least for me, is like I want to talk about what what drives me, what my passions are,
Hmm.
Like I'm really passionate about, for example, uh MGTOW videos, learning. I like, playing guitar and uh, I like playing, this game Go.
Okay.
uh, and I get really, excited about it. But then it's like maybe you could talk about that to a woman, and they're like, "Nah, that's that's logical talk. I don't like that." You know?
I don't I don't know if it's the logic per se that's off-putting. I just think that women are hardwired to by millions of years of evolution, and then reinforced
Mm.
social conditioning due to those conditions prior to civilization. That they're just sort of hardwired to be primarily concerned with themselves, and thus
Mm.
that's where you get the how it makes me feel
Yeah. I,
and how the world reflects upon that. I mean,
what I've heard is that one function of this women are better at recognizing faces. It's said in general, and
hmm,
better at communicating. But it's because if they have a kid, the kid can't speak right first, so they have to watch the kid's face and read it to see what the kid needs.
right.
So yeah.
Well, communication is a very vague notion. I mean,
Mm.
what are they better at? I have no doubt that women are better at communicating certain things, but
Mm.
it really,
They're better to talk. They are better at talking about their emotions
I
than
guess. But
guys.
if you're trying to communicate ideas, generally speaking, I would say men are better at that. We tend
Yeah,
to formulate our thoughts and our reasons at a better,
it's
at a
like
more appropriate level.
women are fascinated by relationships, and men are more like tinkerers and fascinated about how things work, in the world
Right. Well, I
in
mean,
general.
that would be a conflict of interest. I'd say, for example, I mean, I'm interested in relationships in a sense. I want to understand how they work, but I mean, my
Mm.
with women, we were talking about this distinction between proximate and ultimate cause. I think they look at the immediate circumstances and try to understand what's going on with that, or
Mm.
they extrapolate their own personal experiences onto the entire world. And
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it's true. It's like I wonder sometimes, I have some female friends on Facebook,
hmm,
and some of them they have so many friends, and they post new pictures like of them in like cute outfits, and they get like 100 likes or something,
hmm.
and you're like, why are they doing that stuff?
Stimulus, right?
Yeah,
It's their stimulus. I think
yeah,
men and women do pursue different forms of stimuli, and for them, the attention they get, the likes, comments, and that's another. I mean, that's their stimulus.
because well, from my perspective, I'm thinking like, so guys must be hitting on them all the time, and when they say a picture like they say this is cute, it basically means translates into I want to fuck your brains out or something. you know
Uh, probably. It's
so
hard to say.
but I mean, yeah, I'm sure women they like to feel desired, and because it's power in their beauty, they can get lots of free things, and you know from their beauty.
Yeah,
So
I mean that's just the way the
I
world
I
works, I
guess they
think.
want to be validated. So
Yeah, and
and
I think, but rather than getting angry about that, I just think it's better to disengage. You're not going to change that model of
yeah,
things, that pattern of things. That's just the way the world
no,
is.
yeah,
So
exactly. It's like you don't get angry at the dog for barking because that's what dogs do, right?
Yeah, but you can walk away from the dog so you don't hear the barking anymore. That's an option,
Yeah, yeah,
and
that's true.
it's the
And
same thing.
I was thinking about this, like I think it's very important that you yourself validate yourself instead of, seeking it from other people. Because people's opinions about you or your work, they will always change. So I read something about, if you just write down a list, if you have some self-knowledge, introspection, you can just write down, I'm good at this, uh, I'm really good at this, I'm bad at this, I'm really bad at this. So
Mm.
then when you get like, praise, uh, you will be like, yeah, that's accurate. I'm good at this. And if they say, you suck at this, and then yeah, I'm good at this, then you just disregard it. So you become like, yeah, basically. And I think that's important.
Well, I
Shouldn't be
think both men
swayed
and
too
women
much.
have a. Well, I think as human beings in general, we have a tendency to seek validation externally, and it's almost impossible not to. It's just
Mm,
we're hardwired to seek external validation to some degree. I think
mm,
once again, it's a question of moderation. You know, how
yeah.
much validation from
And it's
outside
like
we need.
something I've been wondering, like I mean, I guess from the beginning when you started out making videos, you didn't have that many subscribers and maybe get as much attention online.
Mm.
Uh, but do you feel like it at some point when you started getting, more and more, did you think like it started to get to your head, like you started to get a god complex or something, like a
Uh,
god of MGTOW
uh,
or
well, I've certainly been accused of this, and there's no doubt there exist people who would still accuse me of this, of being some sort of,
cult
ideologue
leader?
or God figure. But no, I mean,
Yeah.
if anything,
Mm.
if anything, I've still kind of been doing my own thing. I mean, a couple of months ago, I made a video about how silly I thought some of these conspiracy theories were, and it had, I think, more dislikes than likes. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people, a lot of my subs are fans of conspiracy theories and think it's obvious this is what's happening, and
Mm.
I tend to make videos about topics that interest me. So I'm
Yeah.
still kind of doing my own thing, and as much as that's true, I don't think I've let it get to my head.
Mm.
That said, I mean, one thing I enjoy about the YouTube format is it is a platform for talking about pretty much anything you want to talk about and exploring all these ideas, which are tend to be much more limited in an academic environment. But I would still
Yeah.
say that, generally speaking, I haven't let it get to my head because I'm
Mm.
still doing my own thing. And if I think it's necessary, I will go against the grain of the MGTOW community. I mean,
Mm.
above, I might be going my own way, but I'm primarily dedicated to knowledge and truth. And
Mm.
if something I bring up rubs people the wrong way, but I think it's accurate, then it's not really my issue. Then
Yeah.
it's their issue to deal with.
Yeah. Exactly.
But
Uh,
that really, I think you touched upon something really important. You can have a channel on YouTube that's essentially a catering service, and I think Sandman is a good example of this,
mm.
where there's just no originality and everything is just directed to the audience.
Yeah.
Or you can try something else. I mean, I'm a small channel, but I think I'm
Mm.
reasonably successful despite that, because I do the things that I want to do. I make longer videos about more complex topics, and there's
Yeah.
some subsector of the population enjoys that. So I'd rather
Yeah.
do that than become a catering service, frankly speaking, because that's what gets to your head. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
then you start
Yeah.
thinking, oh, I
Exactly.
have all these numbers and subs, and that makes me really great. I mean, Sandman if you ever listen to some of his talks, he sounds like a megalomaniac. And I think a lot of that has to
Uh,
do with his incredible growth. But at the end of the day, what has he done? What has he done that's been original? What has he done that's increased his own knowledge and the knowledge of others? No, he's a
mm.
catering service. Now, is that a good reason to let things get to your head? I don't think so.
No. I mean, you need to follow your values or what you value. Like, I think we are both such people that we value knowledge and insight over, more like emotional stimulus, and so even though that's pleasant, it doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah,
Just
and look,
yeah.
I'll be frank to everyone who's listening. Long term, I want to grow this channel more to the point where I don't have to do other things. I can make a complete living off of this. But
Mm.
if the price to make a living off of this channel completely involves, fakery and catering and all of the conventional tricks, social proof and
Mm.
marketing and emotional bullshit that conventional success models require, I will shut the
Mm.
channel down. I'm not going to compromise my metaphysical
Yeah,
soul and my own nature as an individual
I
to
mean,
to to, to do that.
you basically become a YouTube whore then, like.
Well, it's a terrible word, but in some sense, it's true. I mean, you can. There are many routes to success, but I am
Mm.
essentially attempting a more long-term one that doesn't involve any of the conventional approaches, or at least there are some conventional approaches. I mean, I
Yeah.
have my gorilla image and whatever,
Mm.
but which I like because
Yeah.
he's reading
Eh,
Darwin's Descent of Man. But I
Yeah.
don't. I don't want to have to go there, and because I know I would feel terrible about myself. I don't like
Yeah.
engaging. So why would I do that
It's,
just for the
it's
sake of
like you can,
success?
yeah, you reflect like, what am I contributing, to the world? Maybe it's better to reach fewer people, but give them, some good
Absolutely.
insights. Maybe they can take something away and improve their lives, or they can learn to look at things differently. Maybe they get some, new ideas. So I think it's better just if you reach maybe a few people that you have a good impact on than just
And
catering to the
that
emotional
that's what happens
needs.
inevitably, though. I
Yeah.
think in my observation, I've been around for a
Mm.
while now, that over time you just naturally end up attracting the types of people who are just who they themselves are seekers of knowledge or are interested in these types of
Mm.
topics and videos more than the sort of the kickstart or the emotional stimulus. And so
Mm.
it's kind of a natural sieve, if you will. It's just sort of the people who would naturally be more attracted to PewDiePie or the more sort of emotional stuff. They just
Mm.
don't watch my videos, which is fine. It's
Yeah.
their preference and whatever. And the
Yeah.
people
But
who
I'm
are,
thinking,
so yeah, they
I'm
can do that.
thinking also like maybe it's good also to be a bit like emotional if it feels genuine to yourself, like, because then you seem more like a human being.
Yeah,
Like.
yeah. Well, I've been accused of not. I mean, sometimes I've made emotional videos, and one of my more popular ones, "Man, the Self-Loathing," is there's not much insight in there. Well, I guess you could argue some people would argue there is, but it's
Mm.
mostly emotional, and I think it
Yeah.
does have its value sometimes.
Mm.
But I don't find conventional emotions particularly useful to me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they just
I
get in
mean,
the way. So I kind of just
yeah.
discard them and don't really have any. I just don't
Yeah.
use them very much. But now
For
that
me, it's
we're
like.
moving towards this, we're kind of moving towards the end now. This is a very unique opportunity to ask
Yeah.
someone who's from Sweden, which is called the feminist capital of the world, right?
Yeah.
What is, I mean, Sverige, you have your own feminist party. Tell me what life is like in the quote unquote feminist capital of the world.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah. I mean, this feminist party, it gets a lot of attention in the media, and it's like I've spoken to some of my friends. I've linked them my channel, and they seem to associate feminism with equality, for both sexes.
Hmm.
So I think it's like in Sweden, you can say like all the different political parties, they are like basically the same if you compare it to like uh, they're all uh, vanilla ice cream, but it's some sprinkles of mainly consisting of socialism and feminism, but some different sprinkles on top. So feminism is like, it seems, at least to me, that most people in Sweden are brainwashed basically to think that feminism is equality. You know.
Well, I
Because
read, I don't know if this is true, maybe you can confirm it, but I had read that the Feminist Party is pushing for some sort of for in families for fathers to be forced to take off time to spend with their children or something like that.
yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with that, but
Okay.
I can imagine, uh, because I guess because it's, I've looked at some statistics here, and it's like men, they work a lot more,
Hmm.
than women, like
Oh,
I guess the
usually.
rest of the world. And the women, on average, get, we have very high taxes in Sweden. Like the more you earn, the more taxes you have to pay, up until, a certain point. Like uh, but the women enjoy, like, in their lifetime, they live longer than men even here, and they enjoy maybe 1 million of Swedish crowns, more than a man on average in their
Hmm.
life.
Well,
So,
yeah, I think
and because the men are working, more, I guess, then feminist parties say, oh, this is not, equal, so men should be forced to stay at home, so we get
yeah.
better numbers, you know.
It's always fascinating to me how extreme feminist ideology, which is just totally at odds with reality, usually, at least,
Mm,
doesn't understand that in the case of say Sweden or any other country, it's men are the ones that are keeping the economy and the structure intact so they can play all these games and do all the stuff that
mm.
they're doing.
Yeah,
So it's
it's basically feminism is there because men allowed it.
well, yeah. I mean, this is I pointed this out, Barbara Barbarossa. This has been pointed out a million times, and you can't really
Mm,
point it out often enough. I mean, the reason
mm.
why we have feminism is because men let it pass through. Men let it all happen,
Yeah,
and women were perfectly okay with accepting the benefits, even if they didn't call themselves feminists. I mean, I think
yeah,
it's human nature to some extent. I
yeah.
think you can
You know,
have
how much free stuff can I get for nothing, or
yeah. I mean,
just.
if
Mm,
seemingly free at least. I mean,
yeah.
I think it's if you don't have a kind of overarching vision of how things work, then it seems
Mm,
free. It seems like, oh, I'm getting this, I'm getting that, and all that.
mm.
But generally speaking, it's not free. It's got to be paid for with taxes, and men tend to work a lot
Yeah.
more than women.
Mm.
And
And the suicide statistics here, it's like men kill themselves like 4 times more than women. I mean, it said, I spoke to, psychologists. I mean, women make more attempts, but they tend to use, pills and stuff.
hmm,
And then, they wake up after 1 or 2 days, feel like shit, but they survive. And men, they tend to use like more lethal types of,
well, yeah, the lethality thing that's kind of universal. Men, they hang themselves or they use guns, or generally speaking, men are much
yeah.
more effective,
And
even at killing
this,
themselves than are women.
yeah.
But
And also, this workplace death statistics, it's like 90 or 95% men
yeah,
die.
but that's universal too. So what?
Yeah.
But I mean, so this is universal stuff. But what?
Mm,
I mean, if Sweden truly is the quote unquote feminist capital of the world, I mean, what it? I know you've only lived in Sweden, but you've read
yeah.
about what if you were to compare it to other societies. I mean, what is more extreme there, say, compared to the UK or the United States, or even in
I,
Germany?
yeah. I mean, it's a lot of, political correctness here.
Hmm.
Uh, like feminism is, a standard, you can say. So uh, I think they're like prone to, taking stuff out of the media which doesn't follow, the feminist standard or something. And
Right.
also, this debate about manspreading, I think it started in Sweden with some girls, starting a blog and posting images of guys, oh, they're taking up 2 seats, they're manspreading.
I don't even. Apparently, in my hometown of New York, this has been passed as some official law. But this was around before this. I remember this was years ago. This was before I was officially, MGTOW. I was one of my ex-wives. I was visiting her in Brooklyn. I lived in the Bronx, and I was coming home and was really late on the subway. I think it was 3 or 4 in the morning. I was tired, and it was empty. There was no one there. So I was man spreading. I took up 2.5 seats or whatever. The train stops. Police officers walk in and they fine me $100. They strip search me first. They fine me $100.
Oh,
They ask all sorts of insane questions, and I was just thinking, you don't have anything better to do? Do I look particularly threatening here?
yeah.
And I'm sent home, and if I didn't pay the $100, I get a court summons, whatever. I paid the $100, but it just so this kind of I think a lot of it is just sort of quotas, but
Yeah.
it's sort of a convenient excuse for quotas now. Now that it's officially some sort of legal measure, and people have quote unquote complained about it, the, police officers are even more incentivized to go after quotas. And New York City police officers, I can't judge the other ones, but these guys have always just been about quotas. I mean, they need to fulfill their quotas. They
Yeah.
don't.
You know what men should do? We should. Everyone should manspread all the time, so the police have to fine everyone and arrest everyone. So
Well,
the paperwork is too much.
I'm pretty sure that they would love that. In my experience, I mean, I knew a guy in New York City. He told me a story where the police officer actually apologized to him. So, man, I'm sorry for doing this, but I have to fulfill my quota for the month.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I heard this story about, some state in Australia, they had a really old law, and it was forbidden for, gay people to have sex. And so what the gay people did there was they basically went out, a bunch of them, because the government thought that, like, this is a really old law, no one applies it anymore, no need to change it, no need to, make it messy with the paperwork and all. So they went out and they had their gay sex, and then they went to the police and said, arrest us.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then, after some time, the law was, changed
Yeah.
or taken away.
I don't know. I don't. This is the question of activism, and I think generally speaking, this sort of activism is a waste of time. I don't think all activism is a waste of time, but the problem is, and I think John the other, who sometimes I don't agree with everything he says, but I think on this point he's pretty right and articulate, is that the concept of, say, men's rights is something, or men's rights activism is not something that's intelligible to most people, because you don't have a society that is, to begin with, particularly understanding towards men. I mean, it all goes back to sperm cheap and ovaries are expensive.
Exactly.
And so trying to make a society understand something, and I think misandry is sometimes interpreted as something that's sort of active, and in some cases, undoubtedly it is. But I think misandry in its most common form is just a kind of indifference. It's just, oh, there's a man and he's a bum or he's homeless, whatever.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to change a fundamental mechanic that has driven
No.
humans since forever, basically. So this kind of activism is silly. I mean, there might come a point where it just gets so extreme that it's just men universally, opt out. Maybe what would be far more effective, for example, I think, than just everyone manspreading would be men take the time, which would be a pain, say in New York City, and just don't ride the subway anymore. Take the bus, which takes a lot longer. You'd only have females in the subway, and then the subway, the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, as it's called in New York City, would lose revenue. And I mean, that could do something. And maybe they would say, oh, let's get rid of this man-spreading thing. That could actually do something, because I think profits matter ultimately, whether it's a government or companies.
Yeah, it's true.
There have been people, for example, complaining about The Witcher 3. There have been a couple of threads, Anita Sarkeesian up to her usual tactics, and she's a businesswoman, so she's got to run her business. I get it, but talking about how it's not politically correct and there's rape and blah 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 blah. But The Witcher 3 sold 4 million copies in the first 2 weeks, and at the end of the day, profits are going to be a lot louder than people's silly notions of activism. And I think if I were living in New York City still, and people were kind of keen on the idea, yeah, I mean, don't ride the subway. Maybe you would have to get up 2 hours earlier. But if this led to fewer and fewer people using the subway as a service and using other services, then yeah, maybe it could actually do something. But I think, I don't think that's going to happen. I think realistically
Mm.
speaking, we're kind of stuck with what we have, and so we can opt
Yeah.
out to the extent that we can. Go your own
Mm.
way. That's kind of what it is. I'm
Mm.
not an activist at all. I've never had
Yeah.
any interest in it really. I just kind of do my own thing,
Mm.
and I think I've explained this position often enough. But my if you want to call it activism, is I make videos, and if it helps people understand things, that's great. And if not, I accept that too. But
Mm.
I'm not here to change the world
Yeah.
because I've heard I'm sure you heard of the myth of Sisyphus, right?
Yeah,
There's
it's the guy pushing the.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
and in English we have the term Sisyphean, and in German there's a term Sisyphusarbeit, so Sisyphus work.
Yeah, it's same in Swedish,
Right.
Sisyphus arbete,
Yeah.
som man säger. Ja.
Yeah. I love jag älskar det där svenska språk. But yeah, so or is it språk?
Yeah, and
Språgen.
I have
That's it.
some more examples of
Yeah, but
feminism
the
here.
point is that this kind of stuff is you're going to push the boulder up there, it's going to roll back down. I'd rather
Mm.
do things in my life that feel where at least give me a sense that the boulder is going to be continually pushed up the hill instead of it
Yeah.
constantly rolling back down. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my take on that. I think everyone knows my take on activism. I mean, I feel like I'm just sort of beating a dead horse with that, but for those of you who are new, who've never heard my take on that, yeah, that's what I think. I think it's a waste of time. I think you're much better served by concentrating on yourself and trying to do things that you enjoy and further your own goals. And if you can help other people in
Yeah.
the process, that's great.
It's
Uh,
like basically that's also, you know, part of equanimity. Like you can only control, yourself. Basically, you recognize, I'm not that, important. I can't do that much by myself. Maybe I can make these videos, and inform some people, but ultimately, I I'm not that significant.
well, I think yeah, this would be an entirely different conversation, but yeah,
Yeah.
or a new one, and maybe we can have it at a later date. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean that's the notion of ego
That's
and
very freeing, like
yeah, I think so.
because I started thinking about this, like if because sometimes you you feel embarrassed, because you mess up or something, in a social context. But then you think like, what about me? How often do I think about people and remember them for like messing up in a social context? How much do I think about other people? Not a whole lot of the time. I mean, I think about them when they have my attention, but otherwise I'm mostly, focused on my goals and my
Yeah.
aspirations. And so knowing that, yeah, I'm not that important, people are not thinking about me that much. It's very freeing, as a thought because,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
in some sense, yeah. Obviously, I make these sorts of videos for myself, particularly when I'm driven to put a scripted video together.
Mm.
And the benefit other people have is sort of a secondary thing, but it's a nice one. But yeah, I
Mm.
think at the end of the day, right, but one key element of going your own way is to some extent you have to just stop caring about what people are thinking. I mean, I was
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day how when I was still working in an office, I had to put on nice clothes and blah blah blah, and women would check me out
Mm.
sometimes. These
Mm.
days I run around in torn, ripped jogging trousers and jeans and these really
Yeah.
old faded T-shirts, and I must look like a bum to most of these people. No woman checks me out these days, and I could see the difference. But when I was walking around with a leather bag and a button-down shirt with a tie or whatever, and yeah,
Mm.
that was different. But
Yeah.
who fucking cares at this point?
Yeah.
It's just my
It's
view
like,
as well is none of those people are helping me to gain any more insight to my life. The
yeah.
minute someone does, fine, but it's not happening that way.
Yeah. It's like part of this, Sartre and the absurd, like you attribute so much importance to yourself as the main actor in life because you always have that perspective, but everyone else thinks they're the main actor too. So
Well, yeah, I think
yeah.
we're moving towards the end, but I think that's actually an interesting topic, and we can address it briefly. That the minute you recognize that you're not all that important to other people is the minute you can also recognize that you can be important to yourself.
Mm.
The reality is most of us, particularly men, spend incredible, even Herculean amounts of time trying to impress the rest of the world, and it's a limited impression. It's an impression that's always built upon and based upon your ability to perform and your ability to perform tasks for everyone else. And
Yeah.
the minute you lose that ability, whether it's you just can't do it anymore, a physical disability, maybe you're emotionally damaged, whatever, you will instantly cease having that degree of importance. And so that kind of effort isn't worth it. In terms of cost benefit, it's not worth it because you were never that important to them to begin with. And even when you're doing these things, you weren't
Yeah.
important to them. What you were doing was important to them, but not who you
Yeah.
were, who your interest. And you can see that very clearly that when you stop doing these things for other people, they tend to stop calling, they tend to stop paying attention, and you just
Yeah.
fade into obscurity. And
Yeah.
that's perfectly fine because it's really only in obscurity that you can find yourself and find out what's
Yeah.
really making you
It's
tick.
really comfortable, you know.
Oh
People
yeah,
don't think
yeah,
about me. People don't give a shit about me.
yeah.
That's really, relaxing, at least for
Well,
me, I think.
it is for me too, but I think it's a shock.
Mm.
It's a
Yeah,
shock.
I heard an expression like, this is a monk, Ajahn Brahm, he said this again, when in your teens, you're really worried what other people think of you.
Hmm.
So when you're in your 30s, you don't give a shit what other people think of you.
I mean,
And when you're in your 40s or 50s, you realize that people weren't thinking about you anyways.
well, no. I mean, they were thinking about you in as much as it affected them.
Yeah,
They were thinking about your effects upon them, but
it's like what benefits can you y- do to them? How much are you validating their ego?
exactly. And so, I think a lot of not being important in some sense is incredibly liberating, or actually realizing and recognizing that, acknowledging that can be a really important discovery. But
Mm.
it can take a long time, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's a topic perhaps for another discussion. We are winding
yeah,
down towards the end, lords and
sure.
ladies. So we're going to wrap this up. Once again, I would recommend that you check out Reflections channel. Well, his name is Reflections. I'll be posting the link in low bar as usual. Check out the video that I recommended. You'll see it. It's the first one there. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope that was enjoyable. And I hope that we see more material from our Lord of Svaria. Svaria? Yeah.
Yeah, Sverige.
Sverige. Oh, there you go.
Mm.
Tack, tack. Anyway, my Swedish is pretty shit, but anyway.
Yeah,
So I'll check you guys out later, and everyone take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and bye-bye.